Government has done what it is doing. It is done in our name. It is supposed to be justified in terms of our interest. In other words, what the government does is on our conscience. When Blair took Britain into a war, for every Iraqi civilian who died, every one of us in England felt a slight sense of guilt, responsibility. I belong to a country, and in this country is declaring a war. It's not Blair, it's Britain. And Britain is all of us. So the first thing that democracy requires is recognition of an individual's moral responsibility. Each citizen should recognize that the decision is taken in his or her name, and he should ask himself, am I happy for my name to be used in this way? Am I prepared to own the actions of the government? Am I happy with it? If you have a society in which a citizen has no such sense of responsibility, your democracy is finished. That's the first cultural principle. If I had time, I would want to say something about it, but it's very striking. When people protested in Britain, or in the United States, or in France, or in Germany, what did they say? Not in our name. You remember those placards? Not in our name. Meaning what? Don't kill, because we are holding your hand. So you are the immediate cause, we are the ultimate, the final cause. It's not in our name. Or no blood for oil. And it's striking that in India, when protests take place, I haven't seen those kinds of placards which says not in our name. I'm not saying this is good or bad, that's a different story. But the point is, this consciousness that in a democracy you and I carry a measure of responsibility for what the government does in our name. Second, in a democracy, lies with us. The government acts, but we have to on it to dislike. And therefore, the second thing that democratic culture requires is the spirit of active citizenship. Wanting to get actively involved in the affairs of the country, local level, regional level, national level, whatever level, but active citizenship is a must. And ability, therefore, in active citizenship means willingness to think, willingness to form an opinion, willingness to criticize, to disagree with the government. And if you feel that a minister or a representative or whoever is behaving in a way as if he were the Lord of the universe, you should have the courage to stand up and say so. So the second element in the democratic culture is the courage to stand up, the intelligence to form an opinion, and to actively participate in the conduct of public affairs. Third, in a democracy, our interests are closely related. If a small group resorts to violence, it affects the security of all of us. If some people are poor and do damage to themselves, they not only damage themselves, they threaten all of us. And therefore, our interests are interlocked. And hence, democracy requires a sense of mutual concern. If some people are dying or starving, it matters to me that this happens. It matters to me that this happens in my country. When, for example, the Prime Minister recently talked about toilet in every girl's school, every Indian must have felt ashamed. Do we have schools, even now, that a girl has to go home when she wants to go to the loo? Have you not even thought about it? Would not the first Prime Minister of India and all the others who came after us, would they not have said, look what is happening? To say by 2019 or 20, January will know exactly what the year is. Like this in this year, every school will have a toilet. 69 years after independence, and for all these years, when I heard this, I almost burst into tears. That there are girls in our school who go to school and then sit quietly for 4 hours because they can't go to the loo. So democracy requires a sense of concern. It's my country, my community, this is a blemish, this is a scar, and I can't live with it. The fourth thing that democracy requires is that it is bound to include, unless it is Saudi Arabia, it is bound to include people of different religions, different cultures. Therefore, your definition of the community, the identity of the community, should recognize this plurality. In other words, define your country, your community in such a way that no one, whether he is a Hindu or a Muslim, Christian, man or a woman, no one feels excluded or marginalized, because then he would feel that he is less of an Indian than somebody else. There can't be degrees of Indianness. Indian is an Indian, full stop. Therefore, you define Indian in such a way that everyone, that it encompasses, includes everyone, whatever his color or religion or culture. And finally, I could go on, but finally, democracy requires a very profound distinction between private and public. When I act as a citizen, citizenship is a public status. It's not like being a father or a mother or a neighbor. It's a higher power. A citizen is somebody who, through his vote, can put people in power or take them away. Citizenship is a public office. Those we elect as our representatives are public officers. And they are public persons. And as public persons, they can only be guided by public considerations, public norms, norms of public morality. So when I am taking a decision, or when Praveen Bhai or Jaidan Bhai are taking decisions as public persons, they look at the merit of the case. If instead we start saying, this is my brother, this is from my caste, and something is going wrong. Or if pressure is brought on me saying, sir, he is kaka na mama ni foina chokra na chokro se. One would say, look, please stop it. I'm wearing a hat as a public person. I'm not your mama, I'm not your kaka, I am this person, Jainar Das or Praveen. And that is the only capacity in which I shall act. In other words, democracy requires autonomy of the public realm, where public persons are only guided by public norms, not by private considerations. Having said all this theoretical sketch, and you must forgive that we academics always like to set out our framework before applying now to India. How have we done? I talked about the 7 stages institutional architecture of democracy, and I talked about 4 or 5 basic cultural preconditions of democracy. How have we done? Now it's a long story. I think by and large, institutionally, we have done moderately well until second. I can't give it higher than 50 out of 100, but I will be happy to give 50. We run our elections reasonably well, free and fair. Although if elections mean a clear choice between political parties, I don't think that's available. Or if political parties choose candidates, then given the fact that 45% of candidates are always sons or daughters of somebody, they may be free and fair, but they are not equal. People don't have equal chance to fight in elections. We have a different kind of corruption in our system, but we shouldn't go into this. By and large, we hold free and fair elections. Our representatives, well, again, criminals, but some are not criminals. Media, by and large, reasonably okay, although many of them subordinated to the corporate interests. Or there is a tendency to dumb down, and therefore newspapers nowadays, in my days, they used to carry reviews of books, long columns of readers' letters. I think sometimes I look at Times of India and I don't find some of those things, but there it is. I think by and large we have maintained a moderately acceptable standard at all of this, we protest all these institutions. But as I say, institutions are not enough. And institutions can only take us so far. And institution, in terms of institutional architecture, Indian democracy has done, as I say, okay. It could have done better, And my question is, why has it not done better? And here I think some of our cultural conditions come into play. And I want to go through some of the most important ones. I think the first thing we did, the first mistake we made, and that mistake I would ascribe to Pandit Nehru and the Anglophile leadership. We had a colonial state which the British had created in order to rule over India. Now we had two choices: to accept the colonial state and fit our democracy into it, or we should have democratized that whole colonial state, decolonized it, and reconstituted it. This is what Cuba did. State is revamped, restructured. Because in our case it is what is euphemistically called transfer of power, which itself is a very disturbing phrase, from one chap to another. The power passed from a pair of white hands to a pair of brown hands. Everything remained the same. Colonial state remained as it was. It was not radically reconstituted. And that has been part of our problem for the last 67 years. What does it mean? The colonial state, you could remember, I grew up in a British Raj. You will remember it was a state lording over society from outside. So to have political power was to be superior to society. It put you above others. The policemen you were frightened of because they were agents of the state and not responsible to you. Has any of these things changed? That's the test. Even today, an ordinary Indian citizen, when he sees a policeman, he doesn't say, this check is for me. He will do what he will give the services I want. He's a friend. This guy can lock him up, beat him up, file a bogus first information report. Same thing about civil servants. Or going to politicians, when a politician is traveling, roads are closed, traffic is blocked, and the ordinary citizen has to wait for minutes, hours, before the poor chap can get from destination A to B. I don't know, Professor Allah, did this happen when you are a minister, but this does happen. I have gone through this on several occasions. And the fact that I'm a Lord member of the British Parliament did not help me at all. I was stuck in a taxi for 35 minutes because some wretched minister was going. Now what does this tell us? Just because it doesn't happen in Britain, doesn't happen in the United States. You can clear the road within a minute. Blair wanted, for an urgent vote in House of Commons, he landed in Heathrow Airport, he wanted to get to Parliament, there was a lot of traffic, and he said, look, you wouldn't be able to get to the House of Commons in less than 2 hours. He he sat in his car, there was nothing he could do. All are treated equally. To think that this could happen in this country is unthinkable. And I should have thought after 67 years of independence, we should be able to say, no, you are not a superior people. You and I are equally subject to the law. This is rule of law. Or I can think of lots of other examples where political power. Think of, I have been at Baroda Airport or many other airports, and if a superior looking guy in the white cap walks in, the security officer dare not ask him, frisk him. If he did, he will lose his job. A superior looking minister must be waved through. Now, I don't know many, at least any Western country in which I have lived, this would be unthinkable. And you ask yourself, why? It's not because we don't know what is wrong. It is because we have allowed state to remain an independent sphere of its own, to enjoy certain privileges which are far in excess of what an ordinary citizen enjoys. So my first concern is we should have, and we can even now, embark on the project of radically reconstituting, democratizing the internal structure of the state. Let me now turn to the second culture of precondition of democracy. I say that in a democracy, it is my community, our interests are interlocked, and if therefore some people suffer, it matters to me. They are my people. They are my fellow citizens. This, I think, is the greatest enlightenment of our democracy. That the amount of poverty, I won't trade in figures, the amount of malnutrition, infant mortality, puts this country to shame. It is one of the highest. We are placed 67th on the global hunger index, which is worse than Pakistan, which is 59th. 44% of Indian children are malnourished, compared to 5% in China and 2% in Brazil. Even, as I said, even something as basic as having toilet in a school has become a luxury and requiring international attention. I could go on. The amount of poverty and the sheer wretchedness and the wastage of human substance and the amount of degradation and insecurity that it brings is simply shattering. And you ask yourself, why? Why have we lived with this? Why do we tolerate this? Why have there not been any progress? Either by the middle classes on behalf of the poor or by the poor themselves. It's a long story. I wouldn't have the time to go into this, but I want to suggest one thing. That in our culture, especially in the Hindu culture, there is absolute indifference to poverty. If you saw a poor person, you had either explained in terms of his past life, the karma of his life, or the man himself is responsible, he is not saving enough. In other words, poverty is not accepted as a social responsibility. That its causes are social and therefore can be removed socially. So that we have an extraordinary phenomenon where we talk about all kinds of fancy ideals and the poverty next door. A man on the street wanting help simply doesn't attract our attention. And I know few cultures in which poverty completely falls out of the moral imagination of community, and ours is one of them. The third precondition of democracy, which I think where we need a lot of work to do, has to do with the fact that our caste system has bred a strong sense of hierarchy. You know, the sense of hierarchy has gone so deep that we find it easier to deal with somebody who is inferior, because we know how to put him down, or somebody who is superior, we know how to do him salam. But to deal with an equal is a problem. You are nobody unless you are somebody. And you are somebody only if you have a status and you are superior to someone. Every walk of life that one can think of is there. Take something as simple, and I think it's striking. I was struck by this when I returned to India after many years ago. Something as simple as a calling card. A man's calling card not only contains all his qualifications, but at the back of it, all the positions that he has occupied in the present and in the past. A calling card is a mobile CV. Why do we do this? What is it telling me? I want to know where the man lives, what his email is. Why the hell do I want to know how many positions he is president of this, vice president of this, secretary of this? Why is it important? It's important because he wants me to know that he is someone. And that somebody is the designation that he has outlined. More importantly, these are personal level, and more importantly, the sense of hierarchy affects our political life, our cultural life, in a very big way. Because of the sense of hierarchy and because of our difficulty to deal with equals, we as a people have found it very difficult to build a team of equals, where we can talk to each other freely, frankly, dissent, disagree, shout at each other, but still remain friends. And this is not new. the authoritarian streak in a leader is not new. Although Gandhiji was much more accommodating, I mean, he was no less authoritarian than many others. If he didn't get his way, like a child, he would collect his marbles and say, I go home, I go on fast, or I leave Congress party. When partition takes place, people blame him because they say, you said you will partition over your dead body. So why did you not stop it? Why should one man take the responsibility? The entire leadership was involved. But this kind of authoritarian speaks so that you personalize politics, because one individual is supposed to represent. And I think if you look at many of the chief ministers, I've collected the biographies of styles of administration of 9 chief ministers, including Mamata Banerjee, or our dear friend Lalu Prasad, or Jayalalitha. And Jayalalitha, I think, is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Our ministers know their departmental policy through newspaper or through memoranda she might send. She looks upon the assets of the state as a personal property, so she said, I'm going to distribute transistors to everybody, or I'm going to give chicken to everybody. Now this inability to work as a team, to build a team, and to recognize the cabinet as a cabinet of talented people, and within the second generation is relatively rare. And one of the two finest examples, I don't have the time to discuss them, but two finest examples are Gorwala, who was a great chief secretary, government Maharashtra, at which point the minister said, you may say what you like, but I will do what I want to do. At which point, in this beautiful way, Gorwala says, in his words, I quietly left him, whispering in the old Gujarati proverb, regularly, Satta agar shankan na resigned. And in Bora, now the governor of Jammu and Kashmir, an old friend of mine, in his report, he has even more horrifying stories to tell. That it's simply impossible to have a genuine dialogue between a minister and civil servant discussing policies. So what happens? Either the civil servants double guess what the minister wants and say, or they get together and quietly manipulate the minister, which they do. So very successfully done. Manipulate the minister into taking the decision they want him or her to do. Now with this kind of situation, what kind of decisions do they make? How are these decisions made? Is the information properly fed? Is the judgment of senior civil servants respected? Is the dialogue taking place? No, the hierarchy comes in the way. And I've just mentioned two other things so that we have enough time for discussion. I think the fourth difficulty we have had in managing our democracy is that although we have established a reasonably successful democracy, we have not been able to cope with the consequences of democratization. As democracy spreads, the Panditji had an easy time. Smaller percentage of people voted. There was a colonial state. People's expectations were low. Democracy didn't really need a strong sense of individual rights. When that begins to spread down, democracy in India really begins in mid-60s, not in 1947. As things begin to percolate and individuals say, I am somebody, because I have certain rights. When that happens, the gates are thrown open to all kinds of people. Yeah, absolutely rightly, because this is what democratization of democracy means. But the question is, how do you manage it? Because a sudden increase in number creates problems. If I can say as an academic, it's a problem in the university. You have a college, you have a university, you have a discipline, you have your admission requirement, you get your teacher to work hard, and all of a sudden you find that your number is increased by 20% or 30%. The quality of students is indifferent. What do you do? Either you try to induct them slowly and gradually into the discipline of the system, or you lose your institution. And sadly, for all kinds of reasons, we have managed our democratization, very welcome process, so badly that most of the great institutions we had, universities, colleges, have gone down the drain. The same thing happens in schools. The same thing happens with cities. And I don't know Ahmedabad well enough, but if I take my own city of Baroda, a city, you would remember, a city with a great architecture, with a beautiful center, you are a student there, beautiful. And what has happened? This sudden opening up, which was necessary. I'm not being a conservative, reactionary line. People had to be voted. The system was much too close. But once you bring them in, they are going to change your institution, which is welcome, but at the same time, you have to change them so that they become part of it. They must know what it is to live in a city, what the history of the city is, how to absorb its ethos. If that doesn't take place, the city is lost. And somebody was telling me the other day, and I am not at all surprised, that Baroda has virtually become an orphan in Gujarat, like badly treated. And somebody frightened me by saying, don't be surprised if there is a plague in a year or two, with all the big rats in the street, garbage not collected and all that. I hope it doesn't happen, but it can. Schools, other universities, all this sort of thing happening. How do we respond to it? Whenever institutions begin to collapse, we can respond in two ways. The United States faced the problem. Sudden expansion, all kinds of colonies. What did they do? Two things. You take your institutions and say, it's a common problem, let's restructure it. Or you say, they'll keep the elite institutions away from ordinary people. Now you can't keep them away from ordinary people. And what have we done? Our elite has quietly moved out of common life. If they don't like a college or a university, they go and spend all the money in some other university. Or, as is increasingly happening, our elite send their children abroad, far more than they used to. But why not spend the same money restructuring our entire educational system so that everybody benefits? But the idea that everybody benefits, that this is a common life that we live together, is not a part of our consciousness. So what has constantly gone on is opting out and leaving the public life utterly uncared for. And the final point I want to make is a very important one, and I hope it's not too controversial. As I was saying, in a democracy, it is very important that we should define the country in such a way that everybody feels part of it. That you define being British or Britishness in such a way that it doesn't have to be only a white Englishman. I can also be British. Black men can also be British. Without some such shared national identity, a common feeling of we are all Indians doesn't arise. And unless we feel that we are all Indians, we won't care for each other, and therefore democracy collapses. So democracy requires a shared sense of national identities. Now in our kind of society, where there is so much diversity, that definition of national identity has to recognize plurality. That we can belong to many religions, many regions. An inclusive, a plural definition. Now my own feeling is, and I may be wrong in reading the history of India, but my own feeling is that we have never really settled the question. Right from our independence, we have been haunted by certain problems. The problem is, what is the place of the Hindu in India? What is the relation between the Hindu and India? And related to that, what is the place of minorities, especially the Muslims in India? And that problem we have debated and debated and debated and never found an answer. Take the Constituent Assembly debates, which I have read very closely and written something about it, and look at the symbols of our national identity. In the Constituent Assembly debates, Article 1, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states, was the subject of intense debate. Question was, as one of the members of the Constituent Assembly said, Nami Karan, that this newborn baby called India needs a name. What name shall we give it? We had 4 choices. India, Hind, Hindustan, Hindustan, if you wanted to be Sanskrit, or Bharat. The most popular was Hind. And that remains, which is why the Prime Minister ended his meeting until recently with Jai Hind. Meetings end with Jai Hind. There was a debate in the assembly, and several people said, I could cite them, we want a name which is in our language. What do you mean by our language? Sanskrit. Therefore, we will opt for Bharat, not this foreign name called Hind. The trouble started. Well, all right, one can live with it. But then the Anglophiles said, you can't call India just Bharat, because they were afraid that Bharat would evoke Hindu memories. So they said, no, let us also call it India. So they put both together. At which point, one member of the Constituent Assembly stood up and said, Mr. President, if from now onwards somebody asks me, who are you? I'll have to say, I'm an Indian who is Bharatiya. Because one is not enough, you have to say both. So India, that is Bharat. But when you produce the authorized translation, Hindi translation of the Constitution, it is not India that is Bharat. It is Bharat Arthat India, Rajyo Ka Sangh Hoga. Bharat comes first, India comes first. See what, unconsciously, what assumptions are we making? That little translation, not an oddity. In English they will say India, that is Bharat. In Hindi they will say, Raghuji will correct me if I am wrong, in Hindi we say Bharat Arthat. Why? What messages are we sending out? That if you are talking to our people, emphasize Bharat. If you are talking to foreigners or English-speaking people, emphasize India. The trouble is already there. Then you look at the other symbols. National anthem. National motto, Satyameva Jayate. Why did we have to go for a motto which, in a language, which is not understood by even 1,000th of 1% of our population? Why not a Kabir's Doha, Sabse Hill Mein Chaliye? Hundreds would have come. But came to Sanskrit. And again, its history. It took me some time to figure it out because papers have disappeared. But if you look at the cabinet papers of 1947-48, I have looked at them, you begin to see the reasons why it is Satyameva Jayate and who put the idea in Panditji's mind in the first instance. But that's a long story. I am not here to talk about that. You will have to invite me again. Or look at the national crest, Ashoka Pillar, Sarnath. The simple story is, if you look at all the symbols of our identity, all of them are either Hindu or Buddhist. All of them. It's as if Muslims never existed. You might say, what about the color of the flag? That green. Well, initially, green was introduced to represent Muslims. But that created political trouble. There were Sikhs said, Bhagava is our color. Introduced Valvas, 15 different demands. So the Congress passed a resolution. The colors of the flag should not be communalized. Should not be read in communal terms, rightly. Therefore, in all our symbols of national identity, there is no Muslim presence. And if a Muslim Indian were to say, ask me, or Dhaval, or Makran, in your symbolic universe, where do I appear? I've been a part of your history for 1,000 years. Where do I appear? I would simply have to say, I'm sorry, you don't. This is extraordinary. Go a step further. When you look at the Constitution of India, this hidden assumption of the Constitution, and I can understand the logic of it. The hidden Constitutional assumption is that India, the Indian state is going to be dominated by the Hindus. Therefore, Hindus do not have to fear from the state. Minorities have. Therefore, we will give minority educational institutions absolute autonomy. The state will not interfere with minority laws and practices. But for the Hindus, the state can interfere with their religion, in their cultural practices, and all that. I'm glad it does. But what I'm pointing out is this asymmetry is explained in terms of the assumption that the Constitution assumes that the Hindus are going to dominate the state. Now, I think I would therefore say that India, as it has evolved, has this dual character. It has a very strong Hindu ethos. The symbols, the name, constitutional assumptions, but at the same time, it's a genuine attempt to be secular in the sense of providing all communities a space. It's a secular state with a Hindu ethos. But precisely because it is both, because the place of the Hindu is not yet fully defined, and correspondingly the place of the minorities is not fully defined, this problem keeps cropping up, which is what is happening now. Who is a Hindu? They are a cultural Hindu. What is a cultural Hindu? The story goes on. I shan't talk about contemporary events because then I'll get into trouble. But I simply wanted to say that there is this unresolved definition of what it is to be Indian, and as a result, our democracy remains tense, unstable, and both the majority and minority remain uneasy in their relationship. Well, I must finish. I think you will see that what I have done so far is to argue the following, and that we have succeeded in laying the foundations of our democracy. It's fairly stable, it's not going to go away, and we have successfully arranged the 7 institutions that I'm talking about. Sometimes reasonably well, sometimes not. Our elections are fair, and we are rightly proud of this. Our media are reasonably good, although there are lapses, but again, by and large, I think we have succeeded in laying the foundation for democracy. But that's only the first step. That we have done. What I have been arguing is that if you want to build a noble edifice of a democracy on this foundation, we have a long way to go. What we have to do is to attend to some of the cultural preconditions. We have to make sure that Indians have a genuine sense of concern for the poor, that our quality of public deliberation is high, that there is a spirit of equality, that people begin to own the state and feel responsible for it, to make sure that the country develops in a manner of which they can be proud. That is a step, long step, that we need to take in order to make democracy a complete success. This is a challenging task, and only the future will tell whether we have managed to execute it successfully. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.